Alright guys, welcome back to Strong Successful Male. So for today, I'm going to read an article, actually two articles. First one titled, Nearly Half of Men Who Take Paternity Tests Are Not the Real Father. And guys, this article is going to be talking about a clinic over in the UK, and they're giving some very revealing information which they found out after doing thousands, it says here like 5,000 tests, to show that half the time, turns out that guess what, the men are not the real father of the kids that went in there for the test. Can you imagine that? Well, I'm not that surprised given all the stories I do, but it's going to break that down and really talk about those details, because nowadays, thanks to the ease of getting a DNA test, lots of unpleasant surprises have come about. And how many times, guys, have you heard me do stories since I started this channel, every now and again, about these guys that find out that guess what? The kids aren't theirs. In some cases, both kids are not theirs. You know, at different times of the marriage, the wife was out, she stepped out, and later on down the road, the guy finds out the kids aren't his. It's terrible. And so I'm going to go through this article here dealing with the more the statistics part of things. And afterwards, I'm going to go through another article, part of an article, and it talks about how a woman, through taking one of these DNA tests, one of those DNA tests for fun, found out that her dad wasn't her dad, and her reaction to that. So, because it's real. So it starts off, it says, testing firm DNA Clinics, which is part of the Salford-based BioClinics group, analyzed 5,000 results selected randomly between January 2014 and June 2016. Well, listen to this. Almost half of UK men who take a paternity test turn out not to be the real father, new figures show. Half? Holy shit. 50% chance that your dad is not your dad? Or your kid is not your kid? Anybody still want to get married out there? Maybe these stats might make you want to think twice about these things. Or most certainly require a DNA test, paternity test, whatever you want to call it, if your girl is having a kid. It's not unreasonable looking at these statistics. Anyway, the testing firm DNA Clinics, which is part of the Salford-based BioClinics group, analyzed 5,000... That thing was, they typed that twice. It says here, the results show 48%, 2,396 of UK men tested were not the biological father. 52% of the 2,604 of those tested were proven to be the father. For England as a whole, 51% were ruled out as being the paternal father. In Northern Ireland, 42% were ruled out, while in Scotland the figure was 39%. Well, I guess the gals are behaving, the lassies are behaving themselves more in Scotland than over in England. The tests were carried out in cases where there was doubt about the identity of the child's father. They were done for personal information reasons rather than for legal purposes. The tests cost around £95. They include the case of a woman who slept with two men on the same night and became pregnant. Two dudes in the same night? Another involved a woman who had a one-night stand with a close friend without her fiancé's knowledge. Others featured a woman whose boyfriend was in prison when she discovered that she was pregnant, and a man who thought he was unable to father children and found out his wife was expecting. He was proven to be the baby's dad. Nicola McChrystal, founder and scientific director of the BioClinics group, said, the statistics are within the realms of what I would expect due to the fact that I've worked in the industry for well over a decade. I would imagine that they would appear shocking to the general public. Not to this public, not to the people that watch my channel. I don't think anything shocks you guys anymore. Nothing shocks me. I've seen and heard and read too much. And it's pretty sad, but then again, I mean, I'd rather know, but that's why they call it red. You know what I'm talking about here. However, it is important to understand that the families approaching the BioClinics for answers generally have good reasons for raising the question of paternity. DNA Clinics offers home testing as well as through a nationwide network of clinics. Retail chain Boots has recently begun selling DNA Clinics kits online. So there's such a demand now for these DNA tests that now online retailers are now selling DNA tests. The divorce rates are about to get even higher. Lawyers should be rubbing their hands together thinking, thank the Lord, more business. DNA samples are collected via mouth swabs from one father, one mother, and one child, and are analyzed in fully accredited laboratories. Nicola added, the general public's knowledge about DNA has changed dramatically over the past 5 years. It is now understood that DNA tests are not only possible, but also commonplace. There is also greater knowledge about genetic inheritance and its impact on health conditions that appear throughout the generations of a family. More and more tests are being organized by the mother rather than the doubting father. That'll be interesting. There's also been a marked increase in the number of tests being organized by older people looking for answers to questions, rumors, and doubts that have plagued their families for years. These cases are testament to the fact that establishing paternity when a child is young is the best course of action. Unfortunately, however, some families' secrets are only revealed when parents have passed away, and the results of subsequent tests can have a devastating effect. DNA Clinics carries out a variety of other tests for groups, including siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins. I can imagine what it'd be like to find out that all along you thought, your dad was your dad, your mom was your mom, whatever, and that wasn't the case. Or you found out that your child, or both your kids, weren't yours. I mean, that would just rip your heart out. And it's so sad when you hear these stories when people find this stuff out. Now I'm going to go over an article, guys, or part of an article that talks about just this, where this man and this woman, they for Christmas time, they did a DNA test. I think it was like Ancestry.com or something like that. And no, I'm not getting paid by Ancestry for bringing it up. And they did it for fun, just, see about where they came from and all that. And you're going to see here, the wife, she was in for quite a surprise. And goes to show you again what happens nowadays. And the title of that article is, Your Father's Not Your Father, When DNA Tests Reveal More Than You Bargained For. Starts, genetic tests are seen as harmless fun, but the secrets they can reveal can split families and leave users traumatized. The first surprise of Michelle's DNA test was how much saliva it took. It was daunting. It took us like 20 minutes, and the more we laughed, the harder it was to do. 20 minutes, you got to spit into different vials? I thought it was just a swab in the cheek and off you go. It was May 2016, and she and her husband had ordered the kits as a very early Christmas present for themselves. They'd been researching their family trees. Michelle had traced her father's family back as far as the 1600s and had wanted to test their DNA, but had been put off by the cost. They were saving for a fertility treatment and had only recently moved to Florida from New York. But Michelle was considering going back to study, and she had been told she had some Native American blood on her father's side. Maybe she could say how much, she figured, she would be eligible for scholarships. Oh, milk the system. Is she going to be another Elizabeth Warren? And so she and her husband came to be cracking up, spitting into their individual vials. She says, we joked about sending them sweetener samples to see if it still worked. In bed one night, 6 weeks later, they pulled the results from Ancestry DNA on their laptop. They were impressed by the news about Michelle's husband, which mostly reflected what he had always been told about his family. Then they opened Michelle's results. The first thing that popped up in a pie chart, and one whole half was red and said, Italy. She says, I was dumbfounded. Like, well, that's a huge mistake. They must have mixed up mine with someone else's. She laughs, but you can hear it was hard won. My husband looked through it, and he says, honey, they didn't make a mistake. This is you. That night, Michelle had her first ever anxiety attack. Recently, DNA testing, once only accessible to doctors and detectives, have been extended to anyone curious about where they came from and willing to spend the best part of £100 to find out. Since launching in May 2012, Ancestry DNA says it has tested more than 10 million people in 30 countries. Holy shit. That's a booming business. 23andMe says it has more than 5 million subscribers, and Family Tree DNA claims 2 million. All of them are racing to grow their databases and their accuracy. Ancestry DNA is especially visible, sponsoring the television program Long Lost Family and running expensive adverts inviting people to discover their inner Viking, or their innate links to the EU post-Brexit. It all sounds harmless until you learn that as well as revealing customers' ethnic origins, many DNA tests will also identify relatives in the company's databases. This DNA matching can throw up previously unknown or unacknowledged brothers and sisters, cousins, uncles, and aunts, or even reveal that the man you call dad is not your biological father. This is the one reason that the UK Human Fertility and Embryology Authority is now calling on DNA testing services to warn customers about the possible emotional fallout. Yeah, because they're probably being sued for that. But imagine that you do the thing, and what I've also heard is that people will do these tests, guys, and then somehow notifications are sent out, I guess, to people that do it as well. And next thing you know, so if you suddenly have a long-lost brother or sister or whatever, in some cases they find out and they track you down when you don't want to be tracked down. And I think there are things you can do to make it that, hey, don't let people know about this, don't let me be in a public database, I believe. But I gotta admit, I am kind of curious about doing it. But there's a part of me that does two things. Number one, I don't want to have like my DNA samples out there in some lab in Iceland stored away. I've seen too many sci-fi movies about what can go wrong. And two, I wouldn't want people showing up my doorstep. You know what I mean? I think I might just let that curiosity go to the grave and say, I am what I am, part Irish, part English, and part Estonian, and a bunch of other shit thrown in there. I really don't need to know a whole much. It says the kits that screen for genetic health risks can deliver equally devastating results. Yet all these tests are typically taken in a spirit of casual curiosity. People are not prepared to have their lives rocked by what they may find out. As her results sank in, Michelle says, I just got very quiet. All these things from my past suddenly started going through my head. Questions, feelings, things that couldn't be explained. Things that my mother would get angry or defensive about if I brought them up. Well, her mother obviously knows the real truth. I started to realize I think I discovered a secret. That night she called her estranged mother, breaking their 2-year silence. She hasn't talked to her mom in 2 years, so obviously there's been issues. Imagine that. She strenuously denied any knowledge of Italian ancestry, and still Michelle thought there might have been a mistake. Ancestry DNA database showed her as having first cousins in Syracuse, New York, where she had grown up, with an Italian surname she did not recognize. The next morning, Michelle called her aunt, who had been only 10 years old when Michelle's mother got pregnant at 18. Her DNA matches open on her laptop in front of her. Michelle asked her aunt, if she remembered her mother dating an Italian boy in the senior year. I'm looking at the last name with 100% match. First cousin. And my aunt says, the only guy I remember who comes to mind is her prom date. And she says that name and that same surname. I stood up, my laptop went to the floor. I dropped my phone and ran to the bathroom and started vomiting. Drama queen. In a series of text messages, Michelle's mother furiously denied that her prom date was Michelle's father, adding that Michelle says that it wouldn't matter anyway since he had died in a motorcycle accident the previous year. So her mother is just deny. Does this sound familiar to a lot of the stories I do? So that's how I found that out. It was very cruel. Michelle found his obituary online, accompanied by a photo of a man with dark hair and olive skin. It was literally the male version of me. Shit, can you imagine that, guys? A subsequent paternity test of the man she had thought was her father confirmed that there was no relation. That was devastating for both of us, says Michelle. He had not figured in his life when she was growing up, and they had only recently reconnected. She had moved to Florida in part to be closer to him. So the dude who thought that was his daughter, even though they weren't connected, because obviously the mom got pregnant at 18 years old, guess what? It's not your daughter. I'm sure he could share some stories to her about her mother if she wanted to listen. Probably now she does. Despite the absence of blood ties, he remained very much in Michelle's life. Paradoxically, she says, the discovery made their relationship stronger, but she has severed all ties with her mother, who 3 years on continues to deny the results of 3 DNA tests. Deny. Does this sound familiar? 3 tests. I think by the 3rd time they're going to get it right. And the fact that she saw the picture of the dude that was her real biological father, and she looks just like him, even though he passed away. Michelle's story may sound dramatic, but it's not unique. Increasingly, DNA tests are bringing to light infidelities, adoptions, cover-ups, and lies that have been concealed for decades. There have been cases of people learning that they were conceived from donated sperm or even that they were switched at birth, says genealogist Deborah Kennett. There have been a lot of secrets covering up the past, and they're starting to come out. I got to tell you guys, I look a lot like my parents when they were younger, but growing up, I was always so different than both my parents and my sister. I truly wondered growing up if there was a mistake at the hospital, if I was switched at birth, or now what I know about things, because I was just so different from all of them, But in terms of looks, there's no mistake. My mom, my sister, and I all have the same nose, and I look just like my dad when he was in his 40s as well. So I think I'm safe there. But personality-wise and all that, I'm completely different. Last year, Ancestry DNA made matches opt in to comply with data retention legislation. Keeping a can of worms shut may have been the added bonus, Kennett suggests. The company says that while almost every customer encounters surprises on their self-discovering journey, these are mostly exciting and enriching for those who are more sensitive queries. There's a dedicated team of experienced staff. Likewise, 23andMe says it has specially trained customer care representatives. When people get these unexpected findings, they tend to distrust the science at first, says Kennett. But even close matches can only reveal so much in isolation. The DNA on its own doesn't give the science. You need the contextual family information as well. So guys, that ends the part of the article I'm going to read. I'm going to post a link, which I'm allowed to post. For many of you guys that I was put in YouTube jail a few days ago because of a link in a certain video, so I have to be very careful with the links I put in there, but this seems clean, so I will post a link to this if you want to read on, because there's another story about a woman that her self-discovery and all that too. It's interesting. But anyhow, guys, this whole thing it's interesting, but it's also just like, holy crap, because it's become, like they said, more common, people taking these tests. Now they're selling DNA kits online and all that. Holy crap. And back to the original article about the fertility I'm getting at here. At 50%, half the time in the UK, in England, that the kids weren't their kids, that type of thing. Although Scotland seems to behave itself, because only 39% is the case in Scotland. But those numbers speak for themselves. But nobody's shocked here, given all the stories, personal stories to find online, articles I read about this. Holy shit. It's going to make people think twice about their actions, hopefully. But anyhow, guys, that'd be very interesting to do. So, all right, guys, that is it for today. Be sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know, guys, have you guys ever taken DNA tests for fun? What were the results? Were there any surprises? Were there any situations where you found out crazy secrets in the family, or maybe your dad wasn't your dad? I don't know. I'd like to hear about it and share it. We're a community here, so we talk about these things. It makes it a lot of fun. And like I said before, believe me, there's a part of me that's curious, but I think at the end of the day, I'm just going to let it go. I may not act like my family, but I sure as hell look like them, so I think it's pretty safe here. And be sure to like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe. And I'll catch you next time.